Welcome to EyE on You. When we talk about the competitive advantages of Hong Kong, the rule of law is always among the first to be mentioned. To maintain Hong Kong's long-term prosperity and stability, in addition to having robust legal institutions, prosecution power free from any interference, and independent judiciary, we need the public to abide by the law, and in this regard, it is important for the public to recognize the rule of law and its application.
However, a recent study entitled Survey on Public Perception Towards the Rule of Law in Hong Kong, conducted in December 2019 by a local think tank, suggested that the current society lacks education on the rule of law and urged the need to strengthen education on the rule of law and recommended that all stakeholders should reflect on the situation and engage in a meaningful dialogue. Simply put, there is a need to strengthen proper education on the rule of law and to engage stakeholders for Hong Kong to achieve greater heights.
In these circumstances, it is our great honor to invite Mr. Chan Chak-ming, head of the Center of the Rule of Law, to join our program to discuss and promote the meaning and the importance of the rule of law in Hong Kong.
恭喜發財，恭喜發財。
Hello, CM. Welcome to our show today.
Hello, Eunice.
Yes, it's widely accepted that the rule of law is an essential attribute of our modern society, and it encompasses diverse elements and fundamental principles. We also take pride in having a very strong rule of law, which is the cornerstone of the Hong Kong success. Could you kindly expound the concept of the rule of law to our audience, and to put alternatively, what is the essence of the rule of law in Hong Kong?
Thank you, Eunice. This is a very good question and very topical. The problem, I said problem, of the concept of the rule of law is there's no universal definition for this term. Different legal academics, some other judges, they all have different interpretation. But to me, at least personally, I think there are a number of important common elements. Number one is, we all said that, equality of law, equality before law. So it doesn't matter your status, your gender, your background, you and the government as well will be subject to the same piece of legislation, the same set of rules. So equality to me is fundamental in terms of the concept of the rule of law. The second most important element is judicial independence. Judges are able to decide cases independently without any interferences. So there are other different attributes or different elements, but to me, these are the two most essential ones. So follow on these two elements, the third element will be, because it's fair, because of the legal system is fair, so as citizens and government, we should obey the law. We should follow the established rules and regulations. Even if you are not satisfied with the current rules, regime, system, then you push for a reform through legal processes. So equality, judicial independence, that will lead to obedience of the existing laws and regulations. To me, that's the fundamental of the elements of rule of law.
Yeah. Right, so that the Standing Committee of the NPC enacted the National Security Law. In your view, does the National Security Law enrich or undermine the rule of law of Hong Kong?
That's another quite a common, to me, misconception internationally, locally in Hong Kong. Well, let me start off with some fundamentals of the national security law. For those who are not familiar with this piece of legislation, it is a national law promulgated by the Chinese National People's Congress, and through a process, through the Basic Law, which is Hong Kong constitutional document, it's now part of the Hong Kong laws. So national law, even though it's promulgated by national government, is applicable in Hong Kong. And this procedure is normal, is legal, is under the Basic Law, a established mechanism. So the commentary say that, oh, this is undermining Hong Kong existing legal system. This is incorrect, because this is a well-established procedure provided for under the Basic Law.
So as we all know that the NSL, the National Security Law, has been enforced for almost like 19 months. So can you tell us what is the profound impact to Hong Kong's political legal framework and framework under the one country, two systems?
I think as a legal practitioner, the most important first point is, like I said earlier, NSL is part of our law now. The upshot, the effect of this NSL is it brought peace to Hong Kong. Again, for those who are not familiar with Hong Kong's situation, is we had a lot of riots, looting, criminal damages, a lot of social unrest started in 2019, roughly June, July, and lasted about 18 months. And because of NSL, because of the implementation of NSL, the social unrest basically stopped. And that's the most important effect. And as to whether NSL has brought about other changes of people's normal life, I disagree. NSL has a very specific target. It's a national security legislation trying to stop behavior that will endanger national security. So in essence, only a very small portion of the population will be affected. Only those who tries to destabilize government, try to commit treason, for example, sedition, terrorism, or collusion with foreign forces, those people will be affected, obviously, because this is a criminal piece of legislation.
Mm-hmm. So what should we expect from the national security law in maintaining the prosperity and stability of Hong Kong, especially in the context of economic outlook?
I think there was a recent survey asking the international investors in Hong Kong what they feel about the NSL. Of course, there are some doubts when NSL first came out, because like any piece of new legislation, it takes time, especially under a common law jurisdiction. Even though you have a law, you still need the courts to decide cases, to clarify some of the concepts under a new legislation. This is actually normal in a common law jurisdiction, not only for NSL. So in the beginning, some of the investors, international investors, they have doubts. They don't understand the nature of the NSL. But after 18 months or so, now they started to realize, like I said, it targets only a very small group of extremists in Hong Kong. So it's nothing to do with normal businesses.
Right.
So since the enactment of the national security law, many in most Western media, they says that they spread a deleterious narrative in that the Hong Kong national security law poses a threat to the Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy, or they have totally disregard of the immediate positive effect to a society and to our strong judicial, independent judiciary. So in order to push back this kind of malign rhetoric, what can we as the legal practitioner do, and how can we defend the rule of law in Hong Kong?
Thank you, Eunice. This is a very good question. Like I said earlier, NSL, it's a criminal piece of legislation promulgated by national central government, applicable in Hong Kong, and this is within the basic law framework. So this is our system. NSL very, very specifically under Article 4 and 5 of the NSL specifically say that the existing human rights protection are enshrined. Under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, all the existing rights in Hong Kong are actually expressly protected under the NSL. So when the accused is arrested by Hong Kong police, accusing him or her of breaching NSL, for example, treason, then the presiding judge will actually have to look at Article 4 and 5, whether the offences, whether the acts are actually in contravention of human rights. So the existing human rights in Hong Kong are not compromised. Finally, I want to add one more point. National security law is actually very common in in almost all countries.
Right.
They have some sort of national security legislation. Hong Kong is a common law jurisdiction, so let me quote some common law countries as a comparison. In the US, there's a Patriot Act, Homeland Security Act, and a whole host of other legislation. I counted more than 20 different pieces of legislation to do with national security. In the UK, similar, they have Terrorism Act. In Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they all have some sort of treason, national security law. In Singapore, Malaysia, they have Internal Security Act. Very, very similar to what we're doing in Hong Kong. Let me remind everyone, in some of the jurisdictions I mentioned earlier, treason is actually can be punished by capital punishment, punished by death. It's a very, very serious crime in all these common law countries for treason. In Hong Kong, national security law also prohibits treason, subversion of central government, terrorism, and collusion of foreign forces. These are very common types of offenses among common law jurisdiction. So there's nothing new in that sense, what we're doing in Hong Kong.
Right. So in additional, the Western politicians, especially in the Five Eyes Alliance, they accuse that the Hong Kong national security law is infringing human rights. In your opinion, what is your view on these accusations?
Again, just referring to my answer earlier, doing it by way of a comparison, what Hong Kong is now doing is not very dissimilar to other common law jurisdictions. Right. I think the important point is actually the implementation. We are actually seeing more cases going through the Hong Kong court system, which is renowned for its independence. I mentioned very earlier that judicial independence is really the cornerstone of the concept of the rule of law. And for the time being, I really don't see anything that erode that judicial independence. And again, for international audience, Hong Kong has a very special judicial system in that we have our own final court of appeal. Our basic law, our constitutional documents we have a court of final appeal. In our court of final appeal, there are 5 judges, and the basic law allows, if necessary, we can actually invite foreign judges to sit on our final court of appeal. So our judicial system is very, very independent, renowned for it. And the cases Hong Kong courts delivered by Hong Kong courts are widely referred to by other common law jurisdictions. So going back to your point, yes, there are a lot of criticisms. To me, some of them are actually unfounded, and even more, they are based on misunderstandings without actually looking at the judgments, for example. Again, in Hong Kong, all the court's judgments are public and they're free. Feel free to go on Hong Kong Judiciary website. You can actually find all the cases and their judgment, the reasoning, why the judge decided that this particular defendant is guilty. So these court judgments are all open. So I welcome everyone to have a look at the judgment before you criticize the Hong Kong judiciary.
Yeah. Some said that we already have the national security law enacted. Then do we still have the need to enact another local legislation for the national security according to the Article 23? Because it is the obligation, this is the constitutional obligation for under the basic law. So what is your view on that, and what should be included in the local legislation?
Absolutely right, Eunice. The basic law, Hong Kong constitutional documents, Article 23 requires Hong Kong to enact a criminal legislation to prohibit 7 types of offenses, including treason, subversion, sedition, official theft of official secrets. Yes. My short answer to you, Eunice, is national security law is a national law which prohibits 4 types of offenses. These 4 offenses, some of them overlap with the 7 offenses under Article 23, but there are still a few offenses not covered by NSL. So number 1, there's some overlapping, but there are still some gaps. We still need to fill those gaps under Article 23. That's number 1. Number 2, Article 23, like you rightly said, is a constitutional duty under the basic law. In fact, Hong Kong's been really, really slow because the constitutional duty started actually from 1st of July 1997. It's now 25 years. Hong Kong government still haven't enacted Article 23. So number 2 is we are far, far behind. Number 1, like I said, there are still a number of different offenses that is not covered by NSL. So looking the 2 together, definitely, I think it is important that the Hong Kong government should look at these loopholes, to plug these loopholes as soon as possible. And I think the government is actually actively looking at it in the next term of the Legislative Council.
I think in this term.
This term, yeah, exactly.
I think basically within this year.
Right. So that's absolutely right.
But another concern is that how long should the consultation be?
That's another very good question. I think yes, there should be some consultation, getting opinions from different parties. But I think the actual implementation to me is still the most important. As long as our basic human rights, everything's guaranteed under the basic law. So how actually you compromise the two pieces of legislation, the requirement under Article 23 and the existing human rights. There are some technical problems that we as lawyers will definitely have to speak out how to implement Article 23 efficiently.
The National Security Law was enacted by the NPC, the Standing Committee of the NPC, and some may argue that the National Security Law is superior to the local legislation on the Article 23. What is your view, and what is the difference between the Hong Kong National Security Law and the local legislation on the Article 23?
Again, good question, Edward. I mentioned earlier that the way the NSL, National Security Law, is implemented is through the central government. So it's not a Hong Kong local piece of legislation. You both are legislative councillors. So Article 23, on the other hand, is a local legislation. So it will go through LegCo, and you two, the honourable representative of us, will go through the legislative process. However, on the other hand, NSL, National Security Law, is a national law promulgated by the central government. So from that angle, there's the level is different. So it is correct that NSL has a higher level than a local legislation. That's perfectly correct. But that's actually some of the criticism of the foreign media, saying that, oh, this is imposing by Beijing, something not from your own legislature. It's imposed by NPCSC, like you said. It's illegal. It's eroding Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. Again, I disagree. When you talk about high degree of autonomy, there's no full definition. What does it mean? But it does spell out in the basic law our rights. What can be done by local government, Hong Kong government, what can be done by central government. For example, foreign affairs, national defense, and national security. These are matters that is out of Hong Kong's government's hands. So from that angle, no, I disagree that that's eroding Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy.
So by comparison to Hong Kong's rule of law to the mainland one, so how are we going to merge the two systems, or whether there is future of merging the two systems of the rule of law in China and Hong Kong, and how is the business in Hong Kong can follow the rule of law in mainland China?
Again, that's a very good question, especially for foreign investors. I think they choose Hong Kong because a number of reasons. One of the reasons we've been talking about today is the rule of law. They know that Hong Kong has a good reputation for that. Just give you a recent survey. I think it's the Queen Mary University, University of London, Queen Mary. They conducted a survey of choice of arbitration seat. They asked business people, if you have a dispute, you want to arbitrate your commercial dispute, where do you go? New York, London, Paris, these are all the very common places. But Hong Kong is also very popular. It always ranks number 3, number 4. I think it came third in the latest survey, the most popular seat for arbitration. And there's a reason for it. For international investors, they choose Hong Kong because Hong Kong common law jurisdiction. In fact, Hong Kong is the only common law jurisdiction within the whole of China. Common law is very familiar. The system is quite familiar by Western societies. So they like that familiarity. So they choose Hong Kong for that reason. There are other reasons, for example, Hong Kong's freedom of foreign exchange. Hong Kong dollar is pegged to US dollars. English is alongside Chinese, they are official languages in Hong Kong. These are all advantages for Hong Kong. But rule of law and the separate common law system from the mainland, I think is quite unique. And this is actually protected under the one country, two systems. We have a very different system from the mainland. Even though we are one country, Hong Kong definitely is part of China, but we operate under a different system, and that's allowed under the one country, two systems. I always said that. We operate slightly differently. But on the other hand, like you said, Hong Kong is actually getting closer to Shenzhen, Qianhai. And some of the elements are actually becoming more common. For example, the Hong Kong Department of Justice, what they're trying to promote is if there is a Hong Kong business in Shenzhen, doing business with Shenzhen local businesses, when they sign their contract, maybe they can consider using Hong Kong law. Maybe they can even think if there's a dispute, they can actually resolve that dispute in a Shenzhen court using Hong Kong law, using Hong Kong rules. So that from that angle, yes, there's some sort of merging, some sort of integration, maybe you can say that. But after all, Hong Kong still maintains its own common law tradition. And that's protected, like I said, under the Basic Law. And to me, I think I'm very, very, very optimistic of this new initiative. I should actually perhaps mention about the GBA as well.
Yeah.
The Shenzhen is, of course, part of the Greater Bay Area. Again, for those not familiar with the concept, it's 11 cities, 9 cities in China, plus Hong Kong and Macau. That's 11 cities altogether. We call it Greater Bay Area in the southern part of China. Population of these 11 cities, 86 million. Hong Kong has a population of 7.4 million, so 10 times more than Hong Kong's small city. The GDP of these 11 cities, roughly the size of the whole of Australia or South Korea. And I mentioned Hong Kong is the only common law jurisdiction within the whole of China. And for foreign direct investments or outbound investment from China to the outside world, or whether Western country investing into the GBA, the Greater Bay Area, Hong Kong has a very special role to play. And especially as legal professionals, I'm very, very optimistic. We should actually grasp this opportunity and help China internationalize, integrate with the world. So Hong Kong is the superconductor.
That's why we take the exam together, the GBA lawyers exam.
Absolutely.
Congratulations on your passing of the
And
exam.
congratulations to you as well. There's a new exam allowing Hong Kong lawyers to have limited practice in the Greater Bay. And Eunice and myself, we both took the exam.
Thank you. So we are very grateful for your time and your insight. Can you give us a summary to how Hong Kong can integrate into the country's development? And how can we uphold the rule of law and the one country and two system framework?
Thank you, Edward. In summary, like I said, one country, two systems is a unique system in the world. It hasn't been done before, so there must be some teething problems in the beginning. It is now 25 years into the reunification of the motherland of Hong Kong. We see a lot of challenges, but I'm very optimistic. Number one, I have full confidence in Hong Kong's judicial independence. The rule of law in Hong Kong fully maintained. Number two, because of the huge opportunities in the Greater Bay Area we just talked about, the legal profession does have an important role to play, and the future is bright, especially for young people. So I encourage people, don't be prejudiced, don't be biased. Look at our country, China as a whole, objectively. Look at Hong Kong's own situation objectively. Then I'm very confident that you will agree with what I said today.
Thank you, CM.
Thank you.
Thank you.